The first sound was not the wind, not the river moving under ice, not the sigh of the house in its winter bones. It was 3 neat taps on glass, knuckle-sure, as if a small, precise hand had reached the bedroom window at midnight. Tap. 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 Artem sat up before he was awake. The room held the soft geometry of sleep, the sleeping daughter in the next room, the dim lamp still on in the hallway because Lena always forgot to switch it off, the coat folded over a chair like a person waiting. The frost made lace of the panes. Beyond it, a dark shape moved. Tap. He slid from bed, careful not to wake his wife, and crossed to the window. The shape leaned close. A beak, polished like onyx. An eye ringed with midnight. A glossy black head cocked with the authority of a messenger. A crow. It tapped the glass again, not frantic but insistent, as if reminding him of a promise he hadn't yet made. Between its claws, Artem saw something thin and colorless, a shred of thread. He unlatched the window. Cold surged in, crisp as bitten apple. The crow hopped to the sill without fear, then hopped back, wings half opened, showing him the fragment of thread the exact shade of ash-gray Lena's scarf had worn down to on its frayed end. The bird dropped the thread into Artem's palm and cawed once, a short, declarative sound. Then it lifted, hovered, and arrowed toward the orchard beyond the river road, leaving Artem with the stale air the house had been holding all night and a thread that belonged to his wife. He should have woken her. He should have shrugged it off as a country thing, birds and shiny things, winter insomnia, a carpenter's ears tuned too sharply to wood and weather. Instead, he dressed without turning on a light. Boots. Coat. The scarf Lena had knitted him in their second year. He tucked the thread into his pocket and stepped into the cold. The moon was a halved coin bent toward dawn. The apple trees in the old orchard stood like monks on an empty road, robed stiff with frost. As Artem slipped through the gate, he heard a rustle, a small struggle of wind in dry branches, then a single wing beat and the crow landed on the fence post ahead of him. It looked back to make sure he followed. "All right," Artem whispered, surprising himself with how naturally he spoke to it. "Show me." The bird bobbed and glided, then settled on the low roof of the caretaker's shed that separated the orchard from the small slope that fell to the river. It waited, as if it had been taught to wait, as if it understood orders. Artem moved closer, his breath bright in the cold. He felt the odd sensation of being calibrated, of being adjusted along a path that someone else drew. His heart wasn't yet afraid. Not yet. Then voices, low but edged, rose from below the slope. He had to drop to his knees to see. The shed's shadow cut the slope in two. 2 figures stood close under the leaning branches of a winter pear, where the river made whispering sounds under ice that wasn't yet sure of itself. One figure was his wife. He knew the set of her shoulders, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear and then forgot, the seam where her coat had been mended at the cuff. The other figure turned slightly and Artem saw the profile he'd known in schoolyards and harvest parties and the occasional poker game in the back of the bar, Victor Kozak, who drove lorries and wore his reputation like an unbuttoned jacket. "Not here," Lena said softly. "Please." "Where, then?" Victor's voice had a grin inside it. "You picked the place. Unless your husband likes to walk in frost." "He doesn't," she said, with a quick bitterness that made Artem's mouth go dry. Artem watched his own life split along an invisible seam. The crow stepped closer along the roof's edge, and Artem, absurdly, expected it to speak, to explain. Instead it only settled, a patient sentinel. "Don't do this," Lena whispered. "We said we wouldn't talk again." "You said." "I said a lot of things," Victor murmured, taking her wrist. "Then you married him and decided your past belonged in a drawer." Lena tugged free. "My past is mine." "And mine," Victor said. "Because I was in it. Because in a town like this, nothing is ever past." A silence stretched. Artem watched the white of Lena's breath, the shape of her mouth when she was caught between pleading and anger, the exact shape he'd memorized 100 times for reasons that had nothing to do with betrayal. He wanted a clean, cinematic line to be crossed, something unambiguous he could carry away in his fist like a verdict. But life rarely handed men that kind of clarity. Instead, he saw the small things, the way Lena glanced over her shoulder toward the road, the way Victor's boots pressed crescents into the frost that would be gone by morning, the way the crow's feathers made zero sound as it shifted. "I have nothing for you," Lena said. "You have that," Victor said, and pointed, not at her, but lower, at her pocket, where she kept, Artem suddenly remembered, the ring Artem had given her on the day their daughter was born. She didn't wear it when her hands were raw with work. She kept it on a chain. "No," she said, and then, with finality, "this is over." Victor's smile thinned. "It was over that summer. But you wrote me. Don't pretend you didn't." Lena exhaled a shape that looked like the word sorry. Artem's chest went hollow, his hands found the edge of the shed and he felt splinters. "If you come again," she said, "I'll tell Artem everything." "I will. Maybe I should have already." Victor shrugged. "I'm not the one afraid of the truth." He stepped forward. She did not step back. He kissed her once, not gentle, and she didn't respond. She let him, and then she pushed him away with a flat palm. "Go." Artem did not feel the dramatic knife twists stories promised. He felt cold, and small, and very awake. He heard the small, observational voice in his head that always came when he fitted something perfectly into wood. So that is what was wrong, that is how the edges failed to meet. He thought of his daughter sleeping with a hand opened like a starfish on the blanket. He thought of any number of nights with Lena in the kitchen, the radio murmuring, the onion skins bright as gold leaf under the light. Then he heard the crow, a single low croak, and remembered he wasn't alone. Victor went. Lena stood for a moment in the frost, hugging herself, then she, too, left by the lower path. Artem did not move until the river stopped sounding like words to him. When he finally stood, the crow stepped a little closer along the roof ridge and looked directly at Artem as if asking a question. "What are you?" Artem whispered. "And why me?" The bird blinked, then hopped to the fence, then to a broken post, then lifted, circled once, and dropped something small at Artem's feet before flying to the nearest branch to wait. Artem crouched. In the frost lay a metal disc, a keyring worn smooth with years. On it was a small flat charm, the kind sold at the market. He turned it over with a glove. Engraved, shallowly, were letters and a date. L+V, August 2016. Artem stared at the date. The summer before their daughter was born. His mouth tasted of metal. He closed his hand around the charm as if it were a cold that could cauterize him from the inside. He expected that when the house saw him again it would shrink from him. It didn't. He climbed back through the window, undressed in the dim blue, lay down beside the woman he loved and did not, at that moment, recognize, and listened to the sound a sleeping person makes when a dream touches the edge of a breath. The crow's weight on the sill was a separate gravity. He could feel it. At dawn, Artem lit the stove and made porridge because he didn't know what else to do. Their daughter, Mila, patted in with hair like messy bread dough and climbed onto a chair. Lena came in last, tucked her hair, and kissed Mila's head. She met Artem's eyes over the kettle. He had thought shame would live there. Instead he saw something worse, a guarded affection, a plea for normalcy. She smiled, almost asking permission to borrow this morning from the bank of all good mornings. He granted the loan. He buttered bread. He said nothing. The crow came at noon. It announced itself with the same neat taps. Artem opened the workshop door and found it on the threshold, head cocked like a craftsman assessing a joint. He held his hand out, palm flat. "Wait." The crow waited. "Come," he said, and walked. The crow lifted and followed as if it had been learning Artem all along, not the other way around. It led him along the back lane, past the field with last summer's hay stacked like punctuation, and then into the thin belt of trees that stitched the town to the river. The snow gave way underfoot with small sighs. The bird kept low, moving from post to branch to stone. They arrived at the old boathouse that had sagged into itself since the town council cut funds and time did the rest. The crow perched on the warped crossbeam and made a sound like a word. Artem, feeling ridiculous and at the same time horribly lucid, said, "Show me." The bird dropped into the boathouse, vanished among shadows, then rose again with the awkward weight of something in its beak. It landed on a crate and let the thing fall. A tin box, the kind schoolchildren once kept pencils in. Artem picked it up. The hasp was broken recently, judging by the bright rawness of the metal. Inside, neat as a confession, were letters. He did not want to read them. He read them. Lena's hand could be recognized by its swoop and sternness, loops made with terrified care, ink poured into certain letters as if she meant to fill them enough to sink. The dates ran across a single summer, 5 years back, in familiar places, villager names, the market, the road to the orchard. The first were brief, then longer, then short again when scolded by circumstance. "I don't know what I'm doing," one of the long ones said. Artem read half a line, then returned and read it from the beginning, as if rereading might make it mean something else. "I thought I had learned how to fold that part of me away. Then you came back like a train I had once missed." Another, later, "I chose Artem because my life needed straight lines. You are a circle that goes on and on. Do not come to the house. Do not come to the market. If you love me, leave me." A looped L. A scissored V. No signatures, but none were needed. At the bottom of the tin was a single receipt from a small clinic 2 towns over. Check up. Date, late August 2016. No names. The paper's corner had been rubbed thin by a thumb. There had been, Artem realized, a time when Lena had not known and had been counting days the way the river counted stones. The crow made a low sound. Artem closed the tin, not neatly, and stood with a clumsy care, as if the boathouse had learned to float again and any sudden movement would capsize them both. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, and felt foolish. The crow hopped to his shoulder with a delicacy that startled him. It weighed less than it looked. Its claws found balance without pain. Artem felt the pull through his coat as if it had stitched itself there. The bird was warm. He put the tin in his pocket and walked home along the river while a small black king rode his shoulder like a warning and a blessing. That evening, Lena taught Mila to tie a bow on the laces of a small pink boot. The house was a theater where everyone performed domesticity as if the audience might forgive them if the play were good enough. In bed, Artem pretended sleep until Lena's breaths lengthened. He rose and padded to the hallway. The crow waited on the banister, a glossy absence of light in the weak bulb's halo. "Show me more," he said. This time the bird led him not outward but upward up the narrow steps to the attic where Artem stored what he swore he would one day turn into a cradle for Mila's dolls, a bench for the garden, a spare door. He hadn't been up for weeks. The crow flew ahead and pecked, once, at the third board from the eaves. Artem knelt. He knew this board, he had planed it himself. He slid a knife under the seam and lifted. The board came up with a whisper. Beneath, a cloth parcel lay wrapped like a sleeping thing. Inside were not diamonds or money or the theatrical props of crime, but something less dramatic and more durable, a key with a worn brass bow, a tiny notebook with grease on the edges, and a folded page torn from a calendar. The page was a map of weeks. On some days Lena had drawn a tiny crow in the corner. Artem turned the key in his fingers. The head had been scratched with a notch to mark it from its twin. The notebook listed numbers, amounts, dates, names reduced to initials. Some were his A. Wood, A. Gate. Others were V. The handwriting was not Lena's. It was Victor's tight, technical hand. Each entry had a tick. At the back, a single sentence in a different pen: "If you pay, I keep quiet." And below it, small, ugly, in Lena's hand: "I will not pay again." Artem felt the shape of a larger machine turning in the dark. Infidelity was a wound. Extortion was a system. He looked at the calendar page. Tiny crows perched on 4 dates, circled in pencil. One was tonight. One was next week. He had been sleeping a life while a second life kept appointment after appointment above his head. Obedient, Artem said without meaning to, and the bird dipped its head. It understood the word. Or he imagined it did. Either way, the world had shifted. He touched the crow's breast with a finger, very lightly, and it allowed the touch with a gravity that felt like permission. "What does this key open?" Artem asked. The crow lifted, turned, and flew, low and sure, toward the back of the house. Artem followed, careful not to wake Wood or wife. The bird found the narrow service stair down to the mudroom, then the door to the old coal cellar that no one used because Artem feared the damp would make Mila sick. The key did not fit that lock. The bird waited, then launched at the shelf where shoes cohabited with jars and nails and unpaired gloves, and pecked at the box where Artem kept spare keys for the parish hall, the shed, the storefront he'd rented for a season and let go. Artem held up 3 keys. The crow ignored 2 and pecked the third with resolute insistence. Artem swallowed. He knew this key, the brown-painted door above the shuttered barber's, the single room he'd once thought to turn into a small, quiet workshop for carving. He had changed his mind, paid 3 months, and never moved in. The key had stayed. He had never given it to anyone. Not even Lena, not because he distrusted her, but because he hadn't trusted himself to keep from filling yet another space with unfinished plans. He closed his hand around the key. The crow made a sound like a well-oiled hinge. Artem looked past it to the dim square of the kitchen window, where the night made a mirror and the house watched him back. He could have woken Lena then. He could have asked, in the kitchen's ugly light, about Victor, about summer and letters and why the attic needed its secrets. He could have thrown the key into the river. He could have fed the crow crumbs and pretended none of it belonged to him. Instead, he did the one thing that felt honest. He turned to the bird, which seemed to understand orders better than people did, and he said, "Tomorrow. At dusk. When she leaves, show me where she goes." The crow stepped to the edge of the shelf and bowed, absurdly courtly, a tiny sovereign acknowledging a pact. Artem stood in the mudroom with the weight of a key in his palm and the knowledge that nothing in his house was only what it appeared to be. Above him the attic boards lay straight and neat, as if nothing had been lifted. In the next room his daughter turned over in sleep, murmuring the untranslatable words of dreams. In bed, Lena breathed with the rhythm of someone who had built a life and was now keeping time with it, even if it faltered. The crow hopped to the sill and waited for him to open the window. Artem did, and the bird went out into the dark like an arrow loosed toward a target it had already measured. He closed the window after it and stood watching his reflection. He had expected to see a man wounded and wild. Instead, he saw a man with a plan he had not chosen, a man who would, tomorrow, follow a crow to the place where a door he once imagined for himself might now open into a room where his marriage lived in another shape. When he finally lay down again, Lena moved closer, her hand searching for him by habit. He let it find him. He did not know if that was mercy or cowardice. He did not know yet what the crow would lead him to, only that it would obey the command he had given and that he, an obedient man for so long to the small moralities of a small town, had discovered in himself the cold, strange obedience of those who go after truth even when it will ruin them. In the thin hour before morning, a wind rose from the river and worried the eaves. The house made its old ship noises. Artem counted the boards in the ceiling as if measuring time by planks. He drifted into a shallow sleep with a key under his pillow like a bitter tooth, and in that half-dream he saw the crow as he had not seen it before, not as a creature of omen, but as a craftsman's tool, exact and sharp, built for one purpose: removing what is rotten without collapsing the whole structure. Outside, in the orchard, the frost began to ease its hold on the grass, and a black shape settled on the shed roof and watched the house that, by evening, would no longer be simply a house. At dusk, the town's edges went soft and the middle grew sharp. Lamps came on in windows like eyes noticing things. Artem left the house with a lie, "I'm going to check the shop latch," in his mouth that tasted like copper. The crow was already waiting on the fence, an arrow with feathers. It rose when he did and took the higher path, moving not straight but in short, angled flights, as if it wanted him to see the town from many small, deliberate perspectives. Lena left by the front door 10 minutes later, scarf up, hair tucked, tempo of someone who had an appointment she did not want and could not miss. Artem kept to the shadow of the hedge until she turned left on Yablonivska, and then he cut behind the tailor's garden, through the alley that smelled of starch and damp wool. The crow kept Lena in sight from the roofline, gliding from gutter to crossbeam, a bead drawn along a string. The shuttered barber's had been closed since spring, when illness took the owner and the niece couldn't bear the mirror glass. Artem knew the rear stairs like a ghost knows the house he built but never lived in. The second step squeaked. He avoided it. The key in his pocket warmed as if the evening were a pocket itself. The crow landed on the brick arch over the back door and made the smallest sound, the vocal equivalent of a nod. Quiet, Artem whispered to himself more than to it, and eased the key into the upstairs lock. The cylinder turned with the resentful hum of something that expected to be left alone. Inside, dust, chalky as language swallowed too long. The single room had been swept bare of pretense. No chair, no bed. Against one wall stood a table made of 2 sawhorses and a door laid flat across them. On it, neat as surgery tools, were a ledger, a tin of pencils, a stack of cheap envelopes, and a black phone without a SIM. The only decoration was practical, a map of the town tacked crookedly on the wall, thumbtacks black where streets crossed like stitches. Artem stepped where the floor did not complain. He did not turn on the light. The crow slid in through the triangle of window left ajar and settled on the map's top edge, its weight making one corner dip toward the river. Below, on the street, Lena's footfalls counted 3 and then the small clink of the front latch. Artem's lungs emptied and refilled like he'd been underwater. He pulled back into the narrow strip of shadow behind the door. He could see her face as the streetlight reached into the room, pale with wind, tired in the way that comes from holding a story up too long without help. She closed the door and stood listening, a hand on her sternum like someone calming a bird in a box. From her coat pocket, she took a small paper bag and set it on the table. She did not open the ledger. She did not touch the phone. She took a breath that was almost a sob and then folded it into a straight line and tucked it away. Then she wrote, quickly, on the topmost envelope, 2 more payments, then no more. You promised. Her handwriting looked older. Artem realized what had shifted, she was writing without performing it for anyone. It was utility. It was a plank, not a painting. She slid the envelope under the ledger's corner, placed the paper bag atop it, and turned to go. In that motion, her scarf slipped, the ash gray he already knew, and the little chain she wore with his ring on it flashed dull in the dimness. The ring's interior caught a smear of light and then it was gone under wool. If she had wept recently, her face had already rearranged itself back into Lena's daytime map. She turned the latch. Stopped. Looked at the window. For a second Artem thought she saw the crow and would understand everything in the wrong order. But she only adjusted the window gap to a narrower triangle and left. The instant her steps mixed with the street, the crow dropped from the map and pecked the ledger, once, twice. Permission. Artem crossed to the table and opened it. Columns as tidy as a geometry lesson, initials, dates, amounts. A separate column with a small notation he had missed at first, because it was made with a finer pencil and a lighter hand, what the money bought. Silence read one entry. Permit irregularities, read another. Clinic paper, another. Truck records, moved, another. At the top of the page a header in the tight, technical hand he'd seen in the attic notebook, circle. They had named themselves. No one else would have called an extortion scheme something so self-congratulatory. A shadow folded across the ledger. Artem looked up. The crow packed, precisely, at a page corner. He turned it. The next page was not money but inventory, a list of objects held in trust. A string of initials he knew as well as his own reflected back at him, townspeople mapped not by affection but leverage. There was his neighbor Ol's brooch, the silver one shaped like a leaf she wore to funerals, listed with a note, pawned after incident at market. There was the mayor's watch, repaired but unreturned. There was something worse, a single line marked Mila, a school record copy, notary stamp. Beside it, hold. Artem gripped the table to keep from picking up the ledger and throwing it through the window. The crow made a soft, chiding noise, like a teacher to a student about to ruin the experiment. Artem breathed. He reached for the paper bag Lena had left. Inside, money, counted in clean, guilty stacks, and, he knew it before he unfolded it, a note in the tight hand from the attic, last payment due next week. Or we open all the doors. We. Not Victor. Not a single man at the river. A circle. On the wall map, a few intersections had tiny black dots beside the thumbtacks. He stepped closer. Each dot had a date written like a birthmark. 2 of them matched the tiny crow marks on the calendar he had found. He glanced at the crow. The bird cocked its head as if to say, "I have been showing you in more than one language, it is not my fault you only read the one with letters." He took nothing else. He left the ledger where it lay, the envelope under it, the money tucked inside the paper bag. He wanted to burn the whole room. He wanted to salt it. He wanted to sit in it until someone came and then talk to them the way a storm talks to a small boat. Instead, he locked the door carefully and descended past the barber's mirror that still held a ruin of faces. On the pavement, the crow landed on his shoulder and held there a heartbeat. "Find Victor," Artem said, and felt, as he said it, the shift. He was not just following, he was choosing where the next scene stood. The bird lifted, circled once above the barber's striped, faded pole, then moved low and quick toward the lorry yard at the town's edge. The yard had a dog that no one liked and everyone tolerated. The dog lay curled in its shack, the frost making its breath look fanciful. The crow dropped to the roof of the shack and tapped precisely on the tin until the dog raised its head, confused, then, with beautiful timing, hopped to the opposite edge, pulling the dog's attention with it, giving Artem the 3 seconds he needed to slip between the stacked pallets and the wall to the back of the shed where Victor kept records like a man keeps secrets, not well. A window with a broken latch. A room that smelled of diesel and coffee. A desk with a ring where a cup had sat so long it had ghosted into the wood. A calendar with a woman in a swimsuit whose smile had given up on self-respect. On the desk, a second ledger, but this one honest about its dishonesty. Delivery dates and times. The same tight hand. Next to it, a small, flat velvet box, the kind used for jewelry. Artem eased it open with a fingertip. Inside, against the tired velvet, lay Ol's leaf brooch. He recognized the tiny crack near the stem. He had fixed that crack 2 winters ago. He took it. He did not feel guilty. He felt like he was delivering the world back into order one tiny object at a time. He slipped it into his coat and then hesitated. He could not leave with only one thing. He found a folder labeled POL in a clerk's half-dead humor. Inside, photocopies of inspection reports with signatures that looked to have been stamped rather than written. Sergeant Nikola's name was on most. So was the deputy mayor's, Zahorodny, the small man with the big voice who had campaigned on cleaning things up. He heard footsteps. Not the dog. Boots on gravel, 2 sets. The crow, as if it were an alarm wired to his spine, made a small sound through the window and then was gone, pulling attention like a magician's scarf. Artem slid under the desk. The footsteps paused outside. Victor's voice, "Tomorrow after dark. Drop at the room. She'll bring the rest." A second voice, low and oily, "And the carpenter?" "Obedient as chairs," Victor said. "He won't stir." "Everyone stirs," the second voice said. "Our work is to make sure they stir too late." The door did not open. The footsteps moved away. Artem counted to 60, then to 60 again, until numbers had no meaning. He left the way he had come in, through the window with the broken latch and the dog too confused by the crow to draw lines between shadows and thieves. Outside the yard, the crow met him on the fence and dipped its head toward his pocket. He took out the brooch. "Tomorrow," he said. "We return this." The bird made a pleased click deep in its throat. It had the air of a partner whose plan was working even if the other member of the partnership hadn't seen all the steps yet. They did not go home at once. The crow took him to 2 more places as if completing a small circuit before sleep. First, to the war memorial, where the names were carved too shallow and the candles always went out too fast. Behind the third plaque, in a niche Artem did not know existed, lay a roll of receipts wedged with care. He pulled them free. Fuel. Rental. Phone cards bought with cash. It was a small book written in the language of movement and avoidance. He put it back, he was not ready to have even more proof in his pocket. Second, to the notary office's back steps. The crow tapped, not on the wood, but on the underside of the step, and Artem, on his knees in the cold, found a taped plastic sleeve. Inside was a copy of a birth certificate request form with an application date the same week as the clinic receipt and a second, earlier request with Lena's name lightly crossed out and then rewritten in a more careful hand. He did not remove it. He let it be. The step looked at him with its old wood face as if to say, now that you know, what? What was that Artem wanted to know most? He realized he wanted the shape of the truth, not merely its condemnation. Had Lena walked to the river that summer because she loved Victor the way she once loved a song? Because Victor had knocked and she had been lonely? Because he had threatened and she had paid first with time and then with silence? Because Mila's existence had needed a boundary between before and after? Because everything in a town is both love and barter? At home, the lamps were out. The house held its breath like a child hiding in a game. He set the brooch in the blue bowl where they kept their keys and buttons. In the morning he would tell Ole he found it near the bus stop. Lies had become small, brittle bones in his pocket. He was growing used to the shape of them and hated himself for it. He did not sleep long. In that second sleep before morning, a voice spoke in his ear and he woke with the taste of the river on his tongue. For a moment he thought it was the crow, that the bird had been trying out syllables in the night like a locksmith with a box of unfamiliar keys. But it was only his own mind repeating something he had read on the notary's step, application, amended. He turned it over like a board and found rot. Application, amended. What had been amended? Who had written across whose name? At breakfast, Lena set jam on the table and kissed Mila's head and said to Artem, "You're quiet," as if she had not been practicing the line for weeks. "Work," he said, and heard in his own voice a hollow that used to be filled with other things, jokes, questions, the names of birds they taught Mila at the window. The crow was not there. It had gone to do whatever a crow does when it is not escorting a man through his own life. After Mila put on her small red hat and went to school with her neighbor friend, Lena said, "I might go to see Ole after lunch." She said it like a woman making a perfectly ordinary plan. Artem saw the envelope under the ledger in the room above the barber shop. He saw the tiny crows on the calendar. He saw Victor's grin like a careless wound. He said, "She'll be glad," and he meant the sentence in 3 different ways. The day was a disguised machine that wanted to grind him into sawdust. He did the good work first with his hands because wood does not lie, and then, between measuring and shaving, he did the dangerous work with his mind. He made a plan so simple it embarrassed him: stop paying, return what could be returned, expose what could be exposed. He did not know how to take the photographs in the folders and turn them into something that would survive the town's talent for forgetting. At noon, he took the brooch to Ole. The crow watched from the gutter, a coin of black in the bright. "Found it," Artem said. Her gratitude came out in a rush that made him ache. "It fell, the pin. My poor husband has a picture with that brooch," she said, and then, catching herself, "Come in, eat," but he declined because kindness is hard to survive when your lies are fresh. The crow led him next to the post office. The clerk had a face like a rainy window. Packages went and came. The crow did not go inside. It tapped the outside notice board where community announcements layered like years in a tree. Artem looked. Hidden under a poster for a folk dance was a small card with a phone number and a message: "Have you lost something? Circle can help. Fair terms. Confidential." He wanted to rip it down. He did not, because he wanted to see who came to read it. At dusk, Lena left again. Artem followed with less caution, anger a hot coin in his shoe. The crow took the faster flight. This time, at the barber's, Artem did not go in first. He waited in the alley where the wall grew a small beard of moss. He watched her go up. He counted heartbeats. He went after. The envelope was gone from under the ledger. The money too. On the table lay a single sheet. He recognized the hand. It said, "Final meeting, boathouse, tomorrow, midnight. Come alone. Bring child's paper." He could not stop his hand from touching the page, as if the dent of the pencil might tell him something about the pressure of the man who had written it. The crow pecked the corner as if frustrated. Even birds hate being told to wait one more day. He turned and saw the other thing he had missed the night before, because the angle of the streetlight hadn't been right and because grief is a kind of blindfold. On the floor, under the table edge, barely visible, was a hair ribbon pink, cheap, one of a 5-pack from the market stall. Mila's. Or anyone's, but his mind refused generous probabilities. He picked it up. The elastic was stretched tired. A small crust of mud had dried into the bow. He put it in his pocket so the world would feel as horrible in his pocket as it did in his chest. He left without locking the door. He wanted the room to be vulnerable. The crow did not let him go home. It was as if, after 2 days of lone corridors and half-secrets, the bird had decided Artem needed something clean, a question with an answer. It led him past the mill, along the black water cut like a belt around town, and back to the orchard. Not to the shed this time, but to the caretaker's cottage, where windows wore newspaper like shawls. The door had a padlock, the padlock had rust, the rust had been disturbed. "Do it," Artem said to the crow, and felt insane and perfectly sane in the same breath. The bird flew to the eave, dropped behind a flake of loose tin, and came back with a key held sideways in its beak, like a knight bearing a sword. Artem laughed once, a sound too sharp in the air. He took the key, oiled by old dust, and turned it in the lock. The hasp resisted and then yielded with a sigh that sounded like someone telling the truth for the first time in a long while. Inside, the air was old apples and rain. A cot with a wool blanket. A table like the one above the barber, but older, with the confidence of furniture used by hands that didn't care if things matched. On the wall, a row of pegs. From one peg hung a gray scarf. Not Lena's. Another, a man's coat whose pockets had been turned inside out. On the table, an open notebook. Not neat. Not technical. It was a scrawl that dove and rose like birds at dusk. The first page was a recipe. The second, a list of names. The third, a sketch of a crow. After it, entries switched between shopping lists and observations. The kind of person writes like this, Artem thought, is a person who lives alone too long. Then he read an entry that stopped him. Taught her to come when I tap. She brings me trinkets. Smart girl. Smarter than me. I think she picks her own masters. Today she brought me a ring with letters. I gave it back to the boy at the river. He cried. Funny to see a big lad cry. Not funny. Lovely. He loved someone once. The circle thinks they own everything that passes under their eyes. They own nothing. The bird says so. I trust the bird more than the priest. More than the clerk. More than the mirror. If I go before the thaw, I hope the bird finds a good house. Artem turned the page with a care that felt like reverence. The date was from 2 winters ago. The caretaker had died the spring after that. The crow had been loved in this small place by a man who had long conversations with it and wrote them down like prayers. Artem read another entry, 2 pages later. The woman, L, cried at the boathouse and asked me to make him stop. I told her I'm no policeman. She said, no, you're better. You listen. I said, I can send a bird. She laughed, and then she believed me. The bird will show the right eyes at the right time. He looked up at the bird. It tilted its head and blinked slowly. The furious gratitude he felt was as irrational as it was precise. Someone had primed this intelligence with love. That love had not been wasted. It had turned into a method. He found, in a box under the cot, a collection of civic detritus turned to gold by context, old council minutes with margins annotated in an unkind, accurate hand, a pair of binoculars with one lens cracked, a bag of bottle caps sorted by color, and another tin, this one full of keys, none of them labeled, all of them trustworthy. On the lid, somebody had written, Drift. The keys that washed up in a life. Tomorrow, then, Artem said to the room, to the crow, to the idea that he could be the kind of man who arranged facts into a path that led out instead of in. He locked the cottage, left the key where it had been hidden, and walked home in a circle that did not feel circular. He took the long way to go past the school. He looked at the windows as if he could measure the safety of his child by how square a window is. In the kitchen, Lena had left a note, Mila with Ole until 8. Soup on stove. The note did not say, I am drowning. The note did not say, I am paying strangers to keep our house from being set on fire. The note did not say, "I met a man at the river once when the world was a different shape." It said soup. It said 8. It said she was in the house of the woman whose brooch lay in the blue bowl, saved by a man who would not yet tell her what he knew. He stood in the doorway with the ribbon in his hand and wondered, with the cold clarity of a woodworker measuring twice, what mercy looks like under a bad light. That evening, he gave the crow its first command that was not a request. "Stay near her," he said, and pointed toward Old Street, and the bird, obedient in the way that made obedience look like wisdom, went. He followed at a distance. In the early dark, he saw Lena lean her head against Old's doorframe and laugh at a story he could not hear. He saw her hand move to her throat where his ring rode the chain. He saw, too, the shadow detach from the lamplight across the street, the deputy mayor's assistant, the one with hair like steel wool standing too still to be out for air. The crow chose a roofline above him and settled, watching the watcher. Artem marked him, the way a hunter marks a trail without stepping on it. By the time he tucked Mila into bed, he had a hunger in him that food would not answer. He raised the attic board and put the calendar page on the table. 4 crows. One was tonight, which he drew a thick circle around and then scratched out. One was tomorrow. He wrote, in small neat letters beside it, boathouse. He did not write trap or end. He wrote, open. He sat in the dark, the house a sleeping animal around him, and made the kind of promise men only make when they are finally tired of being good. He promised to end something, even if it ripped seams he had spent years stitching. He promised to return as many objects as he could to their rightful owners before he embarrassed the circle with the simplicity of daylight. He promised, most of all, not to let his child be a line item in someone's ledger. When the crow came back, it brought no trinket. It brought a sound Artem had not heard from it before, a low, steady rattle in its throat, like pebbles moved by a slow current. Warning. He crossed to the window. In the lane, a car idled with lights off. The crow pecked the glass exactly 3 times, not panic counting. He remembered the first night. Tap. 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 Tomorrow, he whispered. I know. The car moved, tires whispering. The house settled. The crow fixed him with one black, unblinking bead and then, with a small, comical dignity, tucked its head under its wing. Artem laughed, once, and the sound made a crack in the dark that let something gentler through. He slept early and badly, like a man lying on the good boards of a bridge above water he has not yet measured. In his dream, Hansi could not see painted small crows in the corners of the calendar squares and then, with the same careful hand, drew a door in the middle of the page and wrote above it in technical, fussy letters, open. He woke with a sentence in his mind that did not belong to him and did not belong to the caretaker either. It was a voice whose owner he had not yet seen in a room. Everyone stirs. Our work is to make sure they stir too late. He lay there and said, aloud, to cancel its spell, I am awake. Midnight arrived not with church bells but with the sound of water shifting under ice, the river whispering in a language of warnings. Artem walked as though the town itself had turned into a corridor leading only one way. He carried no weapon. Woodworkers believe in their hands first, and second in silence, but his pocket was heavy with the ribbon, the brooch, the key, and the folded calendar page. Each object was a nail in a board he hadn't yet placed. The crow flew ahead, then circled back, unwilling to let him lag. Its black wings looked cut from the same dark as the sky. As Artem approached the orchard, he felt that odd sensation again, the sense of being guided by a tool sharper than him, a tool that had chosen him because the others had failed. The boathouse sat crooked on its stilts, half in the river, half in the memory of what the town had once promised itself. Lantern light leaked through the cracks in its planks. Shadows moved inside. 2 voices carried over water, low and cautious. One was Victor's, smug as always. The other was softer, calculating. Artem crouched by the trees, heart beating not fast but with a heavy patience, the rhythm of someone who knew the cut must come soon. The crow landed on his shoulder, still intense, its weight like a compass needle. Inside, Victor laughed. She'll bring it. She has no choice. She's softer than he is. Artem's a plank, you lean on him, he doesn't bend. The second voice, Zahorodny, the deputy mayor, spoke with the calm of a man who'd hidden behind committees all his life.
Everyone bends. The circle doesn't need strength. It needs silence.
If she fails tonight, we send the papers.
The carpenter will fold. He's already blind.
The word blind settled in Artem's ribs like a brand.
The crow tapped his collarbone, a tiny urgent code.
Artem looked down and realized it wanted him to notice something, shadows moving not just inside, but around. Two men stood guard by the slope, smoking, their breath and smoke blending. If he moved forward, he'd be seen.
Then, from the road behind, footsteps approached. Lena.
Her scarf pulled high, her coat drawn close, her gait betraying that she had not slept in weeks. She walked as though every step was a deal she had already lost. Artem wanted to shout, to warn her, but the crow gave a low clack, holding him still.
Lena entered. The guards didn't stop her. Inside, silence fell, then Victor's laugh again.
There she is.
The obedient one.
Her voice cracked once, then steadied.
This is the last time.
Artem shifted, branches biting into his palms. He could not see her face, but he knew the tilt of her chin when she was cornered.
Do you have it? Zahorodny asked. She hesitated. Yes.
The sound of paper sliding, then a scrape of the ledger.
Victor's voice again, low and cruel, and what about him? Your husband. He's too clean. He'll smell rot. You'll regret leaving him blind.
Something slammed the ledger, maybe her hand.
Leave him out of this. He knows nothing. Artem's chest burned. The crow shuffled on his shoulder, feathers bristling.
He felt it lean forward, as if urging him to act. But before he moved, before he could measure wood in consequence, a third voice rose from the dark interior of the boathouse. A voice neither rough nor smug, but tired, like rope pulled too long.
You don't own silence. You rent it. And rent runs out.
The lantern light swung. The guards outside turned, startled, and one dropped his cigarette into the frost.
Artem squinted.
From the far corner of the boathouse, where nets and broken oars leaned, an older man stepped forward. His beard was ragged, his coat patched. Artem recognized him from photographs tucked in drawers across town, an old watchman who was said to have drowned years ago when the river thawed too fast. But here he was, alive, eyes bright with the kind of madness that comes from seeing too much truth. Caretaker, Victor spat. You're dead. Not yet, the man said, and in his hand was a whistle, the kind used by night guards. He blew it, shrill and sharp.
The sound cracked the night like lightning. Dogs barked from far houses. A window opened. The town heard.
The circle had thrived in whispers.
Now the air itself betrayed them. Chaos erupted.
Victor lunged. Zahorodny cursed.
Lena cried out.
The guards rushed inside, boots thudding. Artem rose at last, truth like fire in his veins. He stormed down the slope, the crow rising with him in a storm of wings. He burst through the boathouse door as Victor grabbed Lena's wrist. Artem's fist met Victor's jaw with the accuracy of a hammer striking its mark. The man staggered, blood bright on his lip. Zahorodny scrambled for the ledger, but the crow dived, claws slashing paper and scattering pages like black confetti. The guards turned, one drawing a knife, but the caretaker shoved a lantern at them, fire spilling, wood snapping. Smoke rushed the rafters. Out, the caretaker roared. Let the river judge.
Lena clung to Artem, trembling. You shouldn't be here.
I should have been here years ago, he said, pulling her toward the door. Behind them, Victor shouted, this isn't over, but his words drowned in the rush of water as the boathouse floor groaned and gave way. Ice cracked, lantern fire hissed, and the circle's meeting place collapsed into the river that had carried secrets too long.
On the bank, townsfolk gathered in nightclothes, drawn by the whistle.
They saw Zahorodny crawl from the water, ledger pages stuck to him like accusations. They saw Victor vanish beneath black ice. They saw Lena sobbing against Artem's chest, and Artem standing taller than he had ever been, the crow perched above him on a branch, black against firelight. The caretaker stepped onto shore, water dripping from his coat. He looked at Artem once, nodded, and vanished into the crowd. No one would admit later they'd seen him.
Ghosts do not belong in testimony. The town awoke that night.
Whispers hardened into words. The circle's name was spoken aloud, its pieces pulled into light by ledgers, receipts, objects returned to rightful owners.
Sergeant Mikola stammered. Zahorodny was dragged from office. And Artem?
He became the man who had followed a crow into the dark and returned not only with truth but with the keys to every silence the circle thought it owned. In the weeks after, Lena sat across from him at the kitchen table, eyes red, words careful. She confessed in fragments, each shard painful to hold. Yes, she had once loved Victor, but fear had kept her paying long after love had rotted. Yes, she had lied, but not to lose Artem, only to save him. The crow stayed. It tapped the window each dawn until Artem rose. It brought him small things from the world, buttons, threads, coins, as if reminding him daily that even fragments matter. Mila fed it crumbs and called it Master Black. One evening, as the thaw began, Artem carried the attic calendar to the river and burned it. He scattered the ashes where the boathouse had sunk. The crow perched on his shoulder, watching. "You showed me everything," Artem said softly.
"Not just betrayal. Not just rot.
You showed me how truth has weight. And how silence," he broke off. The crow cawed once, a sound that was neither answer nor denial, but something older, the sound of judgment. From then on, whenever a secret stirred in town, people swore they saw a crow tap on Artem's window. And Artem, obedient as always, but no longer blind, rose to meet it.
Because once a man has followed truth into the dark and returned, he cannot unlearn the path.
And he cannot forget the weight of a crow's eye, black as midnight, fixed on him like destiny.